Super. Thanks very much, Declan. Morning, everybody. I hope you're all well and had a good summer. So we have a fair bit to get through, so I'm gonna dive straight into it. And we can catch up again at the end if I'm ahead of schedule. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the mock paper first of all. Okay, so the mock paper, I sent you out the mock paper a week or two ago. Hopefully you've had a chance at least to look at it. If you haven't had a chance to attempt it, don't worry. That's not a problem. But we'll cover most of that off here today. So I'm going to go through the mock paper, give you some ideas as to how you might answer the questions if those questions were to come up in the real exam, which can be useful because there are times where the questions that come up in the real exam are very close to what came up in the mock exam. So we'll do that for most of the session. Then I'll put the mock paper away. I'll take out the real paper. Only I will be able to see it, unfortunately. But I will have a look through the real paper, and I'll give you some guidance as to maybe some areas to focus on, so that you may not necessarily have to cover off the entire course when you're getting yourselves ready for the exam. Okay. In the interest of time, for the mock exam, I'm going to send you out. I'm not going to cover off the short questions because they're fairly kind of right or wrong type kind of answers. What I will do is, when the session is over, I will send those out to you so you can have a look through them. If you have any questions on it, you can come back to me. I'm only going to focus today on the long ones, okay? Of which there are 8 questions that I'll have to go through, and there are 3. You can pick any 3 from on the day to answer. Okay. So if that's all right, what I will do is I'm going to start with question 1 from the mock paper. So question 1 on the mock paper was outline the benefits for firms engaging in international trade. Nice short question, but one with a bit of an answer that you can kind of develop. Okay, so outline the benefits for firms engaging in international trade. And the details that you would be looking for to put into this answer are on pages 1 to 4 of module 1, with a particular focus on page 4. So the meatiest of the information is on page 4. So pages 1 to 4 of module 1 will give you the answer to this question. There's more details on some of the benefits of exporting, importing, licensing, and franchising. They're on pages 12 to 18. If you really want to go for top marks and you want to really be impressive, you could potentially give some of the benefits of exporting, importing, licensing, and franchising if they're not already covered off on pages 1 to 4. But the main information is page 1 to 4 of module 1. What we're looking for is there's about kind of 5 or so benefits. They're kind of fairly interwoven. Certainly, some of them are, there's a little bit of an element of duplication when you go through the 5 of them, but the 5 of them are. First of all, profit opportunities. Okay, so that's one of the reasons you would go international. Okay, your opportunity as a firm to make more profit by going international is greater, which is, it's a little bit of a no-brainer. There's 5 to 6 million people on this island. If you manage to sell your product to every single one of them, the maximum market is 5 to 6 million. Globally, there are 7, 8 billion people. So you have a lot more potential. There's a lot more people outside of Ireland than there are within Ireland. So you have a much better opportunity to enhance your profits if you expand beyond the shores of this island. Okay, so profit opportunities is the first one. Second one is better resource utilization. Okay, so if for argument's sake, let's say your product is potatoes, okay, and you manage to get, if we go back to the example a minute ago, if you manage to get 2 or 3 potatoes on the plate of every man, woman, and child on the island, but you still have a surplus of product, that product is essentially going to rot away and you're not going to be able to use it. Okay, so you have better resource utilization if you break out beyond the shores and you start selling them. Similar to things like, software licenses. If it costs you say 5, 6 million to develop a software license, and you manage to sell it to everybody in the country, you're going to get, all you're going to do. And let's say you sell it for €1 each, all you're going to do is get your investment back. Okay. However, if you can sell it, even if you don't go any further than Europe, if you can sell it to everybody in Europe, your opportunity to get a better return on your investment is significantly greater. So, better resource utilization is the second one. Okay. growth prospects, okay, your opportunity to grow significantly. So, like I said, interwoven with the better profits, but your opportunities to grow further, expand your reach, expand your product. And there is, most people who set up a company have an entrepreneurial streak. They would kind of say deep down, most of them would probably say, well, I'd like this to be as big as it possibly can be. So your opportunity to grow it further, if you can go beyond Ireland, is greater. Um, Decreased competition. So you may find that you start selling a product here, but then 9 or 10 companies start kind of saying, "Oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to start selling the same product." And all of a sudden, the competition is very, very fierce, and the maximum, market share that you can get is relatively small. And then it essentially may become a race to the bottom, which is okay. Well, you're going to have to reduce your profit because you're going to have to reduce your sales price to try to attract more customers. So it can become a race to the bottom. Whereas if, for instance, you jump ship and you say, okay, let's start selling over in France, you might find out over in France there's actually only 1 or 2 competitors and they're relatively small. So you might say, well, I have a bit of breathing room over here. I can kind of make some money before the rest of the competition catches up. So that's another reason for going beyond the shores of Ireland. Okay. And the final one, as I mentioned earlier, improve business vision. So entrepreneurs tend to, not all of them, but a lot of them tend to kind of want to make their product as big and as bold and as successful as they possibly can. So, it would stand to reason that, they would get bored quickly enough with just Ireland and then say, okay, let's go further afield. Let's embrace some of the challenges, and let's take this global. Okay. So those are the 5 type of things we're looking for in the answer. So explain, take the information from the notes. Don't just copy and paste it. Explain it in your own words. Give some examples, as I've tried to do as I kind of went along, and that'll give you a good, solid answer for the first question in the mock exam. Are there any questions with any of that? No? Okay, very good. We'll move on to question 2 then in that case. So question 2 is explain the risks in international business and what you can do to minimize them. So in question 1, we talked about all the kind of benefits and so on of going international, but unfortunately, it's not quite as easy as that. There are risks that come along with it, and question 2 is about those risks. Okay, so the answer to this question is found on pages 23, 24, and 25 of module 1. And there's also some additional detail covered in Module 3. If you take on the last 10, 12 pages of Module 3, you again have some additional information as to what these type of risks are. So there's 4 things we're looking for. We're looking for country risk. We're looking for currency risk. We're looking for commercial risk. And we are looking for cross-cultural risk. Those are the 4 main risks of doing business internationally. Now, it is important to answer this question a little bit carefully because there's kind of subcategories under these 4. Okay. Sorry, was there a question there?
Well, I didn't have one, no, but now that you've asked, you
Oh,
broke up just when you were saying what module on pages
sorry.
22, 23, 24, was it?
Thanks, Damien. No problem. I'll repeat. So it's module 1, and it's
Yeah.
pages 23, 24, and 25.
Oh,
Okay.
23, 24, 25. Okay, thank you.
23 on module 1, and then there is also additional details in module 3, the last 10 to 12 pages. Okay. So that's where you'd go for thanks, Damien, and don't hesitate to call it. If I break up again, don't hesitate to interrupt me. Okay, thanks. So the 4 risks, just to repeat them: country risk, currency risk, commercial risk, and cross-cultural risk. So what do each of them mean? Country risk is essentially, I suppose, if we take it as most basic, I mean, there's a number of different categories that would fall under subheadings in country risk, but the most basic might be something like security. Okay, how safe is the country that you're going to be selling your product in? Do you need armed guards following your trucks as you're sending your product into these countries, or are they relatively risk free? So country risk, it can be another type of category. I mean, if we take stuff that's in the news all the time at the moment, things like tariffs. Okay, how likely is it that the setup of your country or the ability to trade internationally of the country that you're trying to go into may change at very short notice. The answer, if you're dealing with the US at the moment, is very high. Okay, so those are a couple of examples of country risk. All right. There's also currency risk. Okay, so if you are trading, let's say, into the US, you will have some dealings with dollars. Okay, we're based in the Eurozone, so we will be trading potentially in euros. So um, if you extend credit of, say, 90 days to your customers, the value of $1 versus the euro is almost certainly going to be different. It might be higher, it might be lower, it might be close, but the chances of it being exactly what it is now in 90 days' time is very slim. Okay, and we'll deal a little bit more about that later. But the impact of that can be quite significant. Okay, you may go from a scenario where you're making money on the transaction to a scenario where you're losing money on the transaction. So the second risk that we cover off is currency risk. The third one is commercial risk. Now, commercial risk exists when you're only doing business in Ireland. It may cover things like having the wrong management team in place. Maybe you've priced the product at the wrong price. Maybe you're targeting the wrong market. The type of day-to-day business decisions that people at the top of the company need to make. But those risks can be significantly more once you go international. Okay, it may not be as straightforward to fire an incompetent management team in some countries as it is in Ireland. Okay, or alternatively, it may be easier. Okay, things like making changes to your product may be more difficult once you're international than they may be if you're dealing here. So those are the type of things that we're looking for that come under commercial risk. And finally, you have cross-cultural risk, okay, which is stuff that is covered primarily in Module 2 and the majority of Module 3. Cross-cultural risk involves the scenario where you assume that everybody internationally is the same as in Ireland. So you fly over, you go and meet them, you immediately kind of treat them as though they're Irish, but in reality they're not. Okay, their way of doing business, their way of running meetings, their way of handling objections, their way of negotiating is just that bit different. You go over, you assume that everybody's the same way as they are in Ireland, and as a result, you don't start off with a good business relationship with your new business partners or your new customers. So how to handle that? You read Module 2 and most of Module 3, and you will have a good understanding of how to do business in the top 20 economies. But the last one there is cross-cultural risk. Okay. So that's the type of thing we're looking for in question 2. We would also be looking for some idea as to how to handle those risks. Under currency risk, there are a number of different options. You can set up a number of different bank accounts. You can get in contact with your bank and fix a rate and say, okay, for the purposes of this transaction, the US dollar is going to be worth 90 cents euro. There's a number of different options there. In terms of commercial risk or in terms of country risk, a lot of it just comes down to research. Okay, there's no point in just assuming, okay, I've randomly picked a country and I know this is going to be a safe country or a stable country to do business with. It may not be. So, but if you do your research, which you can do from the safety, you can do a lot of it from the safety of Ireland. You will get a reasonable idea. So, okay, what is the likelihood of the business environment in that country being stable or not? Okay, so those are the type of things we're looking for in question 2. Any questions on that? Okay, very good. Question 3. What are the main factors to take into account when dealing with people in different countries? Okay, so as I said a moment ago, that's covered in Module 2 and the vast majority of Module 3. We've got the top 20 economies in there, and we give you a good breakdown as to how to do business in all 20 of those. But there are common themes running throughout those 20 countries. So what we're asking you here is, okay, what are those common themes? Okay. And examples in your answer would be very, very useful here, okay? Because it gives a good showing that you understand what it is you're talking about. And if you can rely on any real examples that you may have encountered when working with people or customers from different countries, that'd be very useful as well. And if you get good examples in there, then you're potentially shooting for top marks. Okay. So what sort of themes run throughout Module 2, Module 3? So the first one is greetings, okay? So if you fly over to a different country, in some countries, handshakes are the greetings. In some cases, it's kisses on the cheek. In some cases, you're going to bow. How do you handle eye contact in your greeting? How formal or casual are the initial introductions? So greetings is one common theme throughout Module 2 and Module 3. Basic business etiquette, the do's and the don'ts, okay, things not to mention, okay, because all countries have their sensitive points, either because there's things they've been involved in the past that they'd rather they hadn't been, or they've had things done to them in the past that they're not particularly happy about and they prefer not to talk about. But basic business etiquette, including do's and don'ts, that's another common theme throughout it, and that's one we'd be looking for as part of the answer. Verbal and non-verbal communication. Okay, so how does verbal communication differ from one country to the next? Okay, how does non-verbal communication differ? How are certain countries how do certain countries deal with personal distance? How do some of them deal with eye contact? How do some of them deal with silence? Okay, because in some countries it'd be common if people are thinking over your suggestion, they will sit in perfect silence. In other countries silence would be seen as very awkward and people would kind of feel the need to talk to interrupt that silence. How do you handle meetings? Very important one. How do you handle meetings? Do you turn up on time? Do you turn up late? Are we straight into business? Do we get to know each other for maybe half an hour before we get into business? That type of thing. How do you conduct collections phone calls in various different countries? And finally, how do you handle relationships? When the meeting's over, the business relationship is ongoing. How do you handle it? Are you expected to turn up at kind of the family barbecue on a regular basis, or is it a case of this is a country where they like to do business, make their money, and then their own time is their own time, and they don't want to see their new business partner. So just to recap quickly: greetings, basic etiquette, verbal and non-verbal communication, meetings, phone calls, particularly collections calls, and relationships. Those are the factors to take into account and have a bit of a think over if you're suddenly going to start doing business in a new country. Examples would be very useful as you're going along and giving an answer to this. Okay, that's question 3. Any questions on that? Lovely. Okay, so we're motoring along at a good pace. So we move on to question 4, which again comes from module 2 and most of module 3. Question 4 is, what are the main differences on how a meeting would be conducted in 5 countries of your choice? Okay. So in question 3, we were talking about, in general, what are the different themes throughout module 2 and 3, and what are the things you need to keep in mind if you say, right, I'm suddenly going to start doing business in France, but yet I know nothing about France. Here in question 4, we get more specific. We say, okay, what are the subcategories of the things you need to keep in mind? You're going to have a meeting. What are the things you need to keep in mind in terms of how to make that meeting successful? So the first thing to keep in mind is punctuality. Okay, is this a country where everybody is going to be in the meeting room at 9 a.m. if that's when the meeting is going to take place, or are they going to drift in gradually between kind of 10 past 9 and 9:30? You need to keep that in mind. Okay, some countries will all be there at 9 a.m. Other countries will not. How formal or casual will the meeting be? Okay, should you be, are you going to be immediately into business at 9:01, or is it a case of you need to take 30 minutes, an hour, or maybe even more, maybe over breakfast to kind of get to know people before we talk anything about business? How do we handle introductions and greetings? Okay, in some countries, the US, for example, you'll be expected to kind of shake hands with the person to your left and person to your right and give them a bit of an introduction as to who you are, why you're here, and also, not to be afraid to list off some of your business achievements. Okay, in other countries, introductions will start with the most senior people, be it the most senior in rank or be it the most senior in terms of age, and you will go through that, and everybody will be introduced, and everybody will be given an opportunity to talk, and the introductions may take a bit of time. Okay. How do you handle business cards? That's another one. How do you handle small talk? So that comes under the kind of how formal or casual is the meeting. How do you introduce yourself? And then a very important one, how do you handle disagreements and objections? Okay, so some countries will be very open and direct and say, no, I don't agree with that, or that price is too expensive and there's no way we can do business there. There will be other countries, the one that comes to mind is maybe Saudi Arabia, where they might be a little bit more subtle in terms of it, and you may have to read into some of the body language or some of the atmosphere in the room to get a proper reading as to how the meeting is going. Okay, so those are the type of things we're looking for, and again, examples would be brilliant. Okay, any questions on any of that? Okay, we're all good. Everyone can still hear me and all that? Yep.
Yeah, all good, Paul. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Damien. Okay, so that's question four. Question five. Question five is write a note on the 10 separate risk criteria to be included in your operational risk model. Okay. This is covered off in the second section of Module 3. So once we're finished with the top 20 economies, there is a second section to Module 3 which talks about the risk, the risks, the country risks, the cross-cultural risks, and so on. Part of this is, and this is one of the ways you can address particularly the country risks, is you could have an operational risk model, okay, which delves into the detail and says, okay, this is how we handle this and this is how we handle that, okay? So that is where is it in risks in the second section of Module 3? It's about halfway down on page 3. It's also page 4, and it's most of page 5 as well. Okay, so two-ish pages into the second half of Module 3 covers off the operational risk model. And there's 10 different criteria. So I suppose do keep that in mind. You only have about 30 minutes to answer the question. You have 10 different items to cover off. So what you want to do is you want to give no more than 3 minutes to each of them, okay? Because there's no point in writing novels for the first half and then leaving out the last five altogether. You probably will only get marks for the first five, okay? So you do want to, where possible, list all 10. So the 10 are, I'll just list them off and I'll quickly give you an idea as to what each of them refer to. The 10 are security, political stability, and this is all in the notes, so there's no need to scribble anything down. So security, political stability, government effectiveness, legal and regulatory environment, macroeconomic risks, that's number 5, foreign trade and payment issues, labor markets, financial risks, tax policy, and the standard of local infrastructure. They are the 10 things that you would want to put into your operational risk model. So what are we talking about? Just we're not going to go into massive detail on this, but just give an example or two. An example of risk, security risk is it's kind of in the name. Is the physical environment sufficiently secure? Like I said, what is the chance of there being armed conflict, either when you arrive, or what is the opportunity of armed conflict? What's the likelihood of armed conflict breaking out maybe after you've set things up for a month or two, in which case your warehouse gets burnt down during riots and you have to start all over again. So that's the type of thing we're talking about in security risk. Political stability risk. Okay, so what is the chance of political unrest over the next couple of years? How clear is the constitution in terms of transferring power from one country from one government party to another? Okay, so in some countries elections are held and they're relatively peaceful. In other countries, elections bring chaos. Okay, both in the campaigns and then also afterwards, where the party that may have been ousted is not necessarily keen to relinquish power. Okay. Government effectiveness risk. Okay, so how effective is the government? How open is the government to foreign investment? Okay, not all countries. Foreign investment comes with a lot of opportunities, but it may also come with some risks. Okay, they may see, countries may see us. Okay, well, the jobs or the business is now going to go elsewhere. The money is now going to go to some Western country and is not necessarily going to stay in our country. So some governments will welcome foreign investments, some will not. Okay. So that's a question you need to ask. Legal and regulatory risk. Okay, so can contracts be enforced? So all well and good to have a contract, but if it just gets torn up or if the legal system doesn't allow you to enforce it, then you got a problem. Macroeconomic risk. Okay, is there a chance of the currency maybe devaluing? Is there a chance of a significant recession hitting the country? When you're based in Ireland, a lot of times you talk and you think about what is the likelihood of a recession maybe in the Eurozone. But you got to keep in mind that not every country is in such an arrangement. Some countries can stand on their own. Okay, so you got to ask yourself, if you're dealing with one of those countries, what's the likelihood of a recession there? Foreign trade and payment risk. Can you get money in and out of the country easily enough? Okay. If you've done a deal of $1 million, you want to make sure that $1 million or €1 million on a particular due date can actually leave the country. If they can't, then you've got to take that. It doesn't mean you don't do business, but you've got to keep that in mind. Financial risks. Sorry, that's the financial risk is where devaluation comes under. I mentioned that earlier. Tax policy risks, a very topical one at the moment. Okay, tariffs. And then finally, infrastructure risk. Okay, so are the roads in sufficient order? Is there good broadband throughout the country? Are you going to be dealing with broadband outages on a fairly regular basis? So all of that needs to be built into your risk operational model, which is one of the ways, or a good way of dealing with country risk. Okay, so you cover them off and you ask the questions, and then you say, okay, where there are red flags, what are you going to do to address the red flags? Okay, so that is question 5 in the mock exam. Okay, any questions on that?
I would say if some other question comes up in the exam, oh, well, I'd be dodging that one. It seems quite a lot to it to pack into the time allotted.
Yeah,
With other
yeah,
options, perhaps. I'm just going
yeah,
to put down 10 out of anything. It just seems like
yeah.
a lot in the allotted time to do in the time.
Yeah, it's a good bit. Yeah. Now we, we're always reasonable. If we're looking for two things and only two, then yeah, we'd expect you to maybe write for the guts of 15 minutes on each of them.
Yeah, yeah,
If
yeah.
we're only looking for, and it's probably no harm for me to mention. I mean, the exam questions, because this is something that pops in my head regularly when I'm doing these sessions. The exam
Mm,
questions are not the assignments. Okay, the assignments you have kind of a week or two to get them done.
yeah.
So yeah, we're expecting kind of good bit of work and good bit of detail and long answers. Here you got 30 minutes, okay,
Mm.
from cradle to grave, okay. So we're not expecting we're not expecting the same level of detail in the exam questions as we would have gotten
Mm.
in the assignments, So you can certainly keep that in mind. But yeah, you're right. I mean, 10 of anything is a lot to put in. I would be putting in my answer. I'd be giving a very brief, it may be as
Yeah,
short as half a line to kind of show
yeah,
I understand,
yeah.
and then you move on, because you got a max of
Yes,
3 minutes on each one. Um,
yeah.
so yeah,
That's what I was thinking.
we realize if we're asking for 10, we're not going to get the same detail if we're asking for two or three.
Yeah, perfect. All right.
Okay. So let me see. Is my screen frozen or something? No, it's working. No. Okay, so this is the one where I'm quickly question 6. I'll read out question 6, and then I'm gonna find the share button. Question 6 is explain with examples the effect a foreign exchange risk can have on transactions over time. So this is covered in pages 7 and 8 of module 3, and again, it's in the second, like the last question, it's in the second section. So this deals specifically with currency risk. Okay, so what can happen? What we're asking here is what can happen if currency risk kind of goes severely right or severely wrong, and what maybe can you do about it? Okay, so this is the one where I'm going to. We can get back onto Zoom. Where am I? Hang on. Give me a second. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to click share, and hopefully we're on the right one. Okay, you guys able to see a white screen with some black writing?
Yep.
Yep, great, super. Okay, so I'm going to put this up for a minute, but this is what is in the notes on it. Okay, I'm just going to skip over the wording here. I'm just going to go straight to the example. Okay, so this is just to give you an idea as to what can happen, both from a good point of view and from a bad point of view in terms of currency. So I mentioned currency earlier. Okay, so here's the example, and this is in the notes if you want to read back over it. Okay. So, if you agree to buy 100 items from a US supplier and every item costs $20, you're going to spend $20,000 with that supplier. Okay, so $20,000 is going over to that supplier. Okay, but we're based in Ireland, so we deal in the euro rather than the dollar. Okay, so exchange rates come into play. Okay, so the exchange rate for the dollar in the example here is 91 cents to the US dollar. Okay, so it's not $20,000 that we're paying over to the supplier. It is, when you convert it into euro, it is 18,200 euro. Okay, so hopefully people are following me so far. If you then add the 5% profit margin and you sell the goods, you are now going to get back into your bank account 19,110. That's what you're going to get from the customers that you sell the product to. Okay, so you have paid 18,200. You have received 19,110. So that gives you an overall profit of 910 euro. Okay, so we're in good shape in the first example. Okay, now let's take a scenario where the dollar strengthens. Okay, so Trump does something that the world kind of says, yeah, that's a good idea. And the dollar strengthens. Okay, and the dollar is now worth 97 and 97 euro cents. Okay, the price of the goods now is not the 18,200 that we paid in the first example. It's now gone up. Okay, it's now 19,400. Okay, we're still going to be selling our goods. Okay, we're not increasing. We're not going to increase our prices because we feel the price is appropriate and the market is maybe going to balk if we increase the prices. So we're still selling the goods at 19,110. Guess what? We have now lost 290 euro. Okay, we paid out 19,400. We got back in 19,110. We have lost 290 euro. Okay, so that shows you what can happen when things go wrong on in the exchange rate side. However, if we take a more positive example for us, let's say the rate falls. Okay, so Trump announces something, and then people kind of say, okay, not such a good idea. The markets react negatively, and the dollar falls. If the dollar falls, so let's say the dollar falls all the way down to 85 euro cents to the dollar. Now we're going to buy our products from the guys in the US, but we're only going to spend $17,000. Okay, so in the first example, we were spending a little bit over 18. In the second example, we were spending well over 19. We're now only going to spend $17,000. We are still going to sell our products for the same amount, so we're going to get in 19,110 euro from our customers. We have now made a profit of $2,110 on the transaction. So that's just three little mini examples. They're there in the notes, but it shows you what the difference can be if the dollar gets strong. If the dollar is kind of a medium level, dollar gets strong, or if the dollar weakens. Okay, so you can see the difference. Okay, so I'm going to just turn off the sharing now, but there are a number of things you can do to try to address that. Okay, because businesses don't like uncertainty, and that's an expression that is mentioned many, many times when you hear them discussing it on the radio. Business don't like uncertainty; they like certainty. Okay, so there's a number of things they can do in order to increase their level of certainty. Okay. First thing they can do is they can fix the rate of the currency. Okay, so in the contract they can say, okay, so for the purposes of this transaction, the dollar is worth 90 cents euro. Okay, and regardless whether it goes up or down, or what happens in the meantime, that's what we need to get. Okay, so you agree a price that is independent of any fluctuations of currency. That's the first thing you can do. The second thing is you can pass the risk on to the bank. Okay, so you can contact the bank and say, I'm going to be getting $1 million in 90 days' time. I want to fix the rate. So you will agree with the bank that the rate that is going to be applied to the transaction is whatever it is. Okay, so you call your bank and you make the agreement so that the bank take on the risk rather than yourself. Okay. Third thing we can do, which when I worked at one of my larger clients over the years, this is the way we handle it. You have a number of different bank accounts. Okay, it was a very big company, so they had a euro bank account, they had a dollar bank account, they had a British sterling bank account, they had a Danish krona bank account, Swedish krona bank account. So they had Swiss bank account, and I think one more, which one's casing Norwegian maybe. So they had 7 bank accounts that we managed. Okay, so they did not, when the payment came in, the payment would be sent into the appropriate bank account in whatever currency it came in, and it would sit there. Okay, so they wouldn't actually necessarily, if times were good to convert it into euro, then they might say, okay, times are good, so let's get it out of the USD bank account and into the euro bank account. But if times were bad, it just sat there. Okay, there was no point in taking a loss on the transaction. They would leave the transaction sitting there. We got exactly what we agreed, and then when times were better and the exchange rate was more favorable, then and only then would they move it. Okay. And then the final thing you can do is you can just trade in your own currency. Okay. If you're a big company and you're dealing maybe with a small company, you can say, okay, we're in Ireland, we deal with the euro. If you're going to be a customer of ours, you're going to deal with the euro as well. So we don't care what the exchange rates are. You're going to pay a million euro, regardless whether the exchange rates are up or down. Okay. So those are the steps you can take in order to provide a bit more certainty in what is becoming business-wise and in other ways a much more uncertain world. So that is question 6. Okay. Any questions on that before we move on to question 7, which will actually be the last one? Question 8 relates to legal systems, which we covered off in assignment 2. So we're not going to cover it off here today. And it's not on the exam anyway, so you don't need to worry about it. So you can cross off legal systems, which is in module 4. You can cross that off your to-do list. Okay. So there's one more we're going to do, which is question 7. Okay. So question 7 is, discuss the advantages and disadvantages of the four main collection options open to large multinational companies. Okay. So this is covered off in module 4, okay? And these are on pages 3, 4, 5, and 6 of module 4. Okay, so there's 4 different options. So you've gone international, you've got your customers scattered across Europe, and then you now have to say, okay, the credit is going to be extended. So when credit is extended, we need some collectors to be available to start calling customers in the event of default. Okay, what are we, where are we going to base those collectors? Okay, so you got 4 options. Okay, you can scatter them across Europe and you can have them all in the customer's country. Okay, so you get a couple of French collectors, a couple of Spanish collectors, a couple of Italian collectors, a couple of German collectors, maybe some of the Nordics. You got them scattered across Europe. Okay, that's your first option. Second option, which is where I worked for quite some time, you could have a shared service center. Okay, so you can base a shared service center, ideally somewhere in Ireland. And within that shared service center, you have your French collections team, your Spanish collections team, your Italian collections team. They all sit next to each other. They all go to lunch together. They all work nicely together, and they're all based here. Okay, that's option 2. Option 3 is a bit of a split. Okay, so maybe you have 10 collectors on each team. Maybe you base 8 of them here centrally, but maybe you have 2 collectors out in France who are going to be constantly on the road visiting customers, 2 more out in Spain who again are going to be on the road visiting customers, 2 more in Italy, and so on. So maybe you have 80% of your business, maybe you have 80% of your collectors in a shared service model, but you also have a couple of collectors out locally who can get in the car or get on the train and go visit customers. Okay. And then the last one is you outsource it completely, okay, which my company would love you to do. Okay, so you outsource it completely. You hand over the debtor's ledger, and then that company goes and does the collections, and you pay that company a fee. Okay. So there are advantages. Again, there's some crossover. Like question 1, there's kind of crossovers with this, but I'll just quickly go through. Just keep an eye on time, so I need to do this next 3 or 4 minutes. But the advantages of doing it in the country, in the local country, is, well, first of all, you can go and do customer visits. Okay. You're going to be good on local knowledge. Okay, if you have a couple of collectors in France, there's a pretty good chance they're either French, or if they're not, that they've lived in France for a long time. Okay, so your cross-cultural risk between your collector and your customer is maybe significantly lower than it might be if you base everything here in Ireland, and maybe you hire predominantly people who are maybe Irish or maybe not necessarily from the country that they're going to be doing the collections in. Okay, greater scope for customer visits, which I already mentioned. Greater scope for building relationships with sales, marketing, because maybe they're all in the same building, so coffees and lunches and on-site meetings are a possibility. And there's a lot less risk of cross-cultural risk there as well. Okay, the disadvantages of doing it only in the customer's country is, in a shared service model, you might have a bit more weight. You might have 100 people all based in an office here. The chance of them getting the latest software collections package, learning from each other, having full-time collections managers managing them, that's a lot greater than there is if those people are scattered all across Europe. They may be reporting to people who are not actually collections managers, who may know little about collections, may not be able to share their knowledge, and so on. So that's a disadvantage of doing it locally. Okay. If you're in shared service formats, what are the advantages there? Again, it's kind of the reverse of doing it locally. You better knowledge sharing because the Italians are next to the Spanish, are next to the French. So if somebody comes up with a brilliant idea, that can be easily shared throughout the other teams. Additional management support. You have potential savings in terms of office space because you have everybody based in the one place, whereas if you have them scattered across Europe, you have a lot of different kind of offices. So those are some of the advantages and disadvantages. I'm a bit low on time, and I'm conscious I want to make sure we cover off the main exam, but all of that is available to read at your own time, and I am available for any questions on it. It is covered off, just once again, it's covered off in Module 4, and it's pages 4 through 6 in Module 4. We'll give you all the information you need to know on that. Okay? Any questions on that, or will I jump to the real exam, which I know is where everybody really wants to focus? Okay, I'll jump to the real exam then. So, format of the real exam is exactly the same as the mock exam. Okay, so you have 10 short questions. Okay, and you've got 25 marks available for those short questions. Okay, so 2.5 marks for each, 10 available. Sorry, 10 questions, so 25 marks in total for the short questions. Okay, and then there are 8 long questions, and you need to do 3 of them. Okay, and each of those 3 will be worth 25 marks each. Okay, for a total of 100 marks. Okay. What we'll then do is we will then allocate you a score. We'll convert that score into a mark out of 70. Okay, so say you get half the marks, you will be given 35 out of the 70 marks available. And what we will then do is we'll then add up to 10 marks for your first assignment, which could bring you up to 45. Potentially another 10 marks for your second assignment, which could get you up to 55. And then we will give you the average of the marks from the 4 short tests, which could get you up to 65. Okay. So that is a total mark out of 100 that we'll be allocating to you. So up to 70 marks available from the exam, and then another 30 marks available from the short tests and the assignments. Okay. So in terms of what's going to be on the real exam, so this may not necessarily be in order, but I'll give you a clear indication as to what's going to be on the exam. So for argument's sake, I'm just going to call them questions 1 to 8. Okay. So just first of all, in terms of the short questions can come from anywhere on the 4 modules. Okay. So even though I've said discount legal systems from the long questions, and that won't be there, I promise. But you could get a short question on legal systems, so you may just want to kind of have some idea as to what's in there. But the short questions come from anywhere, modules 1 to 4. In terms of the long questions, this is the breakdown of the 8 questions that are on the real exam. Okay. First question comes from module 1, and it's very similar to a question on the mock paper. So find the questions that relate to module 1 on the mock paper and have a good knowledge as to how to answer them, because a very similar one is going to come up on the real exam. Okay. The second question also comes from module 1, and it's related to the various modes of entry into international business. Okay, so you can do importing, you can do exporting, you can do franchising. There's a number of different ways of entering into international business. We want you to talk about those various modes of entry and show us that you understand them. All right. So that's question 2 on the real exam. Question 3 comes from modules 2 and 3. So that is the top 20 economies that we talk about in modules 2 and 3. And it is basically, it's discuss how you would approach doing something differently in 5 countries of your choice. So it might be, how do you hold a meeting? How would you hold a meeting in 5 countries of your choice? It might be, how would you greet people in 5 countries of your choice? It might be, how would you do a collections call in 5 countries of your choice? But basically, we're going to ask you to pick 5 countries from those 20, or you could potentially, in theory, go completely off and pick ones that are not on there, and give us an indication. Okay, how would meetings differ? How would greetings differ? How would collections calls be different in those 5 countries of your choice? Okay. So you can either go down through let's say you're doing meetings, you can go down through the subheadings that I covered off earlier and say, okay, this is how punctual we would be, this is how we do the greetings, this is how we'd handle objections. You can do it that way, and you can talk about, okay, this is how it would be done in France, this is how it would be done in Germany, this is how it would be done in Spain. You can go down that way, or you can take France, and you can say, okay, this is how I would handle everything in France, and then you talk about Germany, this is how I would handle everything in Germany. You can structure it either way. Okay. But that's what question 3 is about. How would you do something differently in 5 countries of your choice? Okay. Question 4 on the real exam, again, comes from modules 2 and 3. And again, it's very similar to a question on the mock paper. So find your mock paper, look at the questions that relate to the top 20 economies, and then know how to answer that question. Because if you do that, you're fairly well prepared for a question on the real exam. Question 5 again relates to modules 2 and 3. And again, it's exactly the same-ish as question 3. It's would you do something differently in 5 countries of your choice? So if question 3 is about meetings, then question 5 might be about collections calls. If question 3 is about greetings, question 5 might be about I don't know, handling objections or the do's and don'ts of doing business in five different countries. So again, know five countries well and know how to explain how you do something differently in those five countries. So, if you look at question three, question four, and question five, which in theory, that's three questions, and it's only three that you need to do. In theory, you could just study the top 20 economies, and if you're very comfortable about how to do all of the different things that we cover in those modules, that's all you would need to know. You can answer three questions, three, four, and five, and you're done. Okay? So you don't necessarily need to stray. If you don't like module one, you don't necessarily need to do it. Okay? You will need to do it for the purpose of the short questions, but they're fairly right, wrong, easy enough to find the answer to type questions. So if you don't like module one, you can kind of more or less skip it. Okay? Now you narrow yourself down a little bit by doing it that way, but you could do it that way. You could know modules two and three really well, and be done. Okay. Question six is from module three, and it's from the sections after we have finished discussing the top 20 countries. So we're into the risk area. Okay. The country risk, the cultural risk, the commercial risk, and the cross-cultural risk. Um, Though it's to do with the risk section, which is towards the end of module three. Okay, so could be your operational risk model that we have in the mock exam. And I will say it is very similar to something that's in the mock exam. So out of the first six questions, you got three of them that are quite similar to the mock exam. So if you know the mock exam well, you should be in a good position to answer three questions out of the first six that are on the real exam. And we haven't even got to the last two. Okay. So question seven and question eight, I'm going to deal with those two together. Again, I said legal systems is not on the exam, and it's not. Okay. So it's from module four, and it's something different to legal systems. Not legal systems, it's something else in module four. So some of that is covered in question seven, and a different topic is covered in question eight. Okay. And they don't kind of cross over. It's not going to compare question seven or question eight. It's nothing like that. One of them will be on one of the sections that is not legal systems in module four, and the other one will be from a completely different section again in module four. Okay. So in theory, you could kind of study, you will be limiting yourself. So I'll say this with a word of caution, but in theory, you could kind of study one module and you'd have two of them. You could study module one and you'd have two knocked out. You can study module four and you'd have two knocked out. You study the mock paper, you have three of them knocked out if you know it well. And again, if you study modules two and three, just the top 20 economies, again, you have three of them knocked out as well. So you don't have to do it that way. You can mix and match and just pick the ones that you think suit you best. But that's a good flavor as to what's in there. Okay. I'm going to say two things, and then I'll open up to questions. One, examples, examples, examples. Okay, it's not a scavenger hunt. Okay, we're not looking for people to kind of say, "Oh, there we are. That's the section in the notes, and here I copy those 4 pages, and bang, there you go, Paul." You're not going to score too highly if you just do that. Okay, we're looking for the information back. We are looking for it from the notes, yes, but we're looking for it in your own words to show you understand it. Okay, and the best way to show that you understand it is examples. So examples, examples, examples throughout would be brilliant. Okay, as I have tried to do as often as possible in the prep. Okay. And the only other thing, because something that I forget to say this, there's still a few assignments outstanding. I can accept the assignments. There's even one that came in last night, which I haven't looked at yet, but I will. I can accept the assignments up to maybe about Thursday or so. You're doing the exam on Saturday. I can take them up to Thursday. I suppose at a real stretch Friday, but after that I'm into exam mode. I'm going to be bang 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 correcting the exams. They go off to Declan and they start a process. So I need to be fairly quick on that. Okay, so I won't be spending time correcting assignments kind of Saturday, Sunday. So if you want your assignments counted, if they're still outstanding, I can still take them, but you need to get them into me this week. Okay. And right on cue, there is Declan.
Here we are. Yes, absolutely. Well done, Paul. Yeah, I think there's a lot covered, and I suppose the good news is that it is recorded. I will send you the link. So if there's stuff you want to just go back on to say what did he say about that, that option is open to you. Just one thing, because I know our true law students have joined us and they're patiently waiting in the waiting room. I didn't want to bore them with all the international details. Um, The one thing we didn't cover, and I think is probably no harm, because I know, Damien, you're worried about having time, and look, manage your time and do the best you can. If on the other side of the equation, if you happen to find yourself with lots of time, all right, so you've answered the two questions, there's still half an hour to go. Um, what I would recommend you do is do a safety question. So rather than just submitting the two questions you've done, do a third question. And what we will do is we will correct all three and give you the highest 2 marks. Is that okay?
Yep.
So, so just in case you have a disaster on the benefits or something of that nature, it might just be so. If you are sitting there and you do have time, now look, two good answers are better than three bad answers. So but we would just let you know the option is there for you if you want to have a just if you have 10 or 15 minutes, just even bullet points down that you will get marks, and just in case there is a disaster, it can cover you off. So just to let you know how that works as well. So guys, the international students now can go and enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll get the links over to you later today, and then we'll have our law students who are staying with us for the next half hour or so, and go and have a great weekend. And if you
All right,
have
lovely.
any
Thanks for going through
questions,
that, Bob.
yeah, I'll actually
No worry, no